Chapter 2. The Rhythm of the Storm. I thought I understood what it meant to lose control of my body. By 16, I had already spent a decade wrestling with my tongue, my breath, the small muscles around my mouth that refused to obey. Words misfired, sounds jammed, sentences crumbled in my throat. I knew the feeling of trying to move something that would not move. Then, just before my 16th birthday, my brain decided to teach me a harsher definition. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. That's how these things prefer to arrive, without ceremony. I was in the school library, trying to finish an English assignment. A book lay open in front of me, the words on the page stacked in neat, confident rows. Outside the library windows, the oval baked under a hard, white Australian sun. A few boys were kicking a footy around, their shouts muffled by the glass. Inside, it was cooler, all dust and paper, and the faint buzz of the ceiling fans. I remember thinking about a single sentence in the book, tracing it with my eyes, repeating it in my head. Inside, I read fluently, as always. Outwardly, I was still, quiet, just another kid pretending to study. Then, without warning, the world tilted. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where everything swirls and blurs. It was subtler than that at first. A small shift in the air, like pressure changing before a storm. I blinked. The print on the page swam out of focus, then sharpened again. I lifted my head. The edges of the shelves had a soft glow to them, too bright and too far away at the same time. Sound changed too. The whisper of pages turning, the murmur of two girls studying at the next table, all of it seemed to recede down a tunnel. I could hear my own breathing more than anything else, loud and shallow in my ears. A strange familiarity fluttered through me, even though I had never felt anything like it before. It was like the moment before a word, the build-up, the tension, the sense that something was about to break loose, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I remember thinking, something's wrong. Then the thought slipped, as if someone had pulled a rug out from under my mind. My body vanished from me. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment I was sitting upright at the table, eyes on the page. The next, I was nowhere. No library, no book, no ceiling fans, no oval outside, no sound, no light, just a blank. When I came back, I was on the floor. The first thing I felt was cold. The library tiles were hard against my cheek, and my shirt was damp with sweat. My jaw ached, a deep, throbbing soreness, as if I'd been clenching it for hours. My tongue tasted of iron, blood. The lights overhead were cruelly bright. A shape loomed above me, our school librarian, her face pale, eyes wide. "Don't move," she said, her voice high and thin. "Just stay still. Help is coming." I tried to answer, but my mouth refused again. Not the familiar speech battle, something worse. My tongue felt swollen, heavy. My jaw didn't seem to understand the command to open. My body was trembling in small aftershocks, an echo of something I had not witnessed, only inhabited. Behind her, a cluster of faces gathered, students peering around the end of a bookshelf, some horrified, some curious, some whispering. I heard one boy say, in a shaky half-joke, "Did you see him? He was full-on shaking." Another voice hissed, "Don't stare." But they still did. Of course they did. For once, my silence had nothing to do with willpower. No choice, just absence. Someone knelt on my other side, the deputy principal. "What's your name?" he asked. His words reached me, slow and deep, like they were coming through water. I knew the answer. I always knew the answer. My name existed, bright and solid, in my mind. It took 3 tries to get any sound out. He leaned closer. "It's okay. You've had a seizure." The word landed like a stone, dropped in a still pond. Seizure. I'd heard it before, like everyone has, floating around in health class or on TV dramas. It belonged to other people, people with medical conditions, people whose bodies did dramatic, frightening things in public. Not me, who already had enough trouble just saying hello. My head pounded. My limbs felt like they were full of wet sand. I realized then that my muscles were exhausted in a way I didn't recognize, as if I'd been running flat out and then hit a wall. They put me in an ambulance, siren off, just the low rumble of the engine under my spine as we drove. The paramedic spoke quietly to me, asking questions. "Do you remember what happened?" Bits and pieces came back in fragments. The book, the strange light, the feeling of pressure building, then nothing. I was reading, I managed, the old choke catching on the word. Even now, my speech found ways to get in the way. He nodded, like that made sense. "Do you have epilepsy?" he asked. I shook my head, the movement foggy, delayed. "Any history in the family?" My mother's face flashed in my mind, her sitting at the kitchen table with me, patient over phonics worksheets, but never anything like this. No, I said. He gave me a small, practiced smile. "All right, we'll get you checked out." Hospitals have their own kind of silence, not the peaceful sort, a waiting silence, jittery, full of fluorescent light and old magazines. A silence where everyone is listening for their name, their turn, their fate. In emergency, they put me on a bed and hooked me up to machines that beeped at regular intervals, measuring a rhythm I'd never paid attention to, my heart, steady and indifferent. They taped sensors to my chest, wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, clipped something to my finger that glowed red. My mother arrived, breathless, eyes already shiny with the beginnings of tears she was trying not to spill. My father came a little later, jaw clenched, his hand firm on my shoulder, as if he could hold me inside my body by sheer will. The doctor explained words that suddenly belonged to me. Generalized tonic-clonic seizure, possible epilepsy. We'll need to run more tests. He said them in a calm, rehearsed tone, the way you say things you've said 1,000 times before, to different families, different kids. "What does that mean?" my mother asked, her voice tight. "It means," the doctor said, "that his brain had a burst of abnormal electrical activity that caused him to lose consciousness and convulse. It may be a one-off event. It may signal the onset of epilepsy. We won't know yet. Onset, like a storm rolling over the horizon." He turned to me. "Do you remember anything at all?" I felt weird, I said slowly. "Like everything went far away." He nodded. "Aura," he said. "Some people get a warning." "Not always, but sometimes." He talked about EEGs and MRIs, about avoiding driving for now, about keeping a diary of any unusual sensations. "Most people with epilepsy live full, active lives," he added, like a line written on a pamphlet somewhere. "We'll work with you to manage it." Manage, another word that sounded neat and tidy, like speech therapy schedules and homework charts, as if this was just a matter of organization and discipline, as if control was something you could reclaim with a calendar and a pillbox. At 16, control is supposed to be the one thing you're gaining. You're learning to move through the world with more independence, asking for less help, staying out later, making choices your parents don't fully supervise. Your body is awkward, sure, but it's yours. You're meant to be growing into it, not further away. I had already felt like my mouth belonged partly to other people, therapists, teachers, well-meaning adults making notes while I stumbled. My tongue never quite felt like it was entirely under my command. Now I had to add my brain to the list of things I could not trust. The EEG room was cold. They smeared gel onto my scalp and attached small electrodes, each one a tiny circle of metal held in place by adhesive. In the mirror, I looked like a low-budget science fiction character, all wires and uncertainty. "Just lie still," the technician said. "Try to relax." I lay there, eyes closed, listening to the faint scratch of a pen on paper outside the room. My own pulse thudded in my ears. "Relax," they said, as if your brain hadn't just staged a quiet mutiny. Later, they did the MRI. The machine was an enormous white tunnel that hummed and clanged. They gave me earplugs, but the noise still seeped through. Deep, mechanical groans that felt like they were rearranging something in my chest. "Don't move," the voice over the intercom said. I learned quickly that "don't move" carries a different weight when you've recently discovered your body is capable of flattening you against your will. Stillness stopped being neutral. It became suspicious, fragile, something that could be shattered at any moment by an internal surge of electricity I would not see coming. When the test results came back, they called us into a small consultation room. It smelled of hand sanitizer and old coffee. The neurologist had a calm, practiced face. He'd probably sat in that exact chair hundreds of times, delivering versions of this news. "There are some abnormalities in the EEG," he said. "Spikes that suggest a tendency towards seizures." He looked at me, not just my parents. "This fits with what happened at school. Given your age and the pattern, I'm diagnosing you with epilepsy." The word dropped again, more solid this time. Not hypothetical, not possible. Mine. Epilepsy. He started talking about medication, names, side effects, dosages. The names sounded like incantations, each with its own promised protection and price. Drowsiness, slowed thinking, changes in mood, liver function, bone density. Each side effect was another way my body might betray me, quietly, off to the side, while we tried to tame the big threat. My mother kept asking questions. My father kept nodding, his jaw working. I sat there, hearing words wash over me, and thought, my brain can ambush me now. That was the core of it. With speech, the betrayal had always been right at the surface. I would open my mouth and immediately meet resistance. I had learned, over the years, to anticipate it, to plan around it, to choose simpler words when I could, to speak less, to count myself out before someone else did. But this was different. Seizures didn't ask permission. They didn't show up every time I tried to talk. They lurked. They waited. They followed their own timings, their own storms. Most people, the neurologist said, learn to recognize their triggers: lack of sleep, stress, flickering lights, alcohol. With medication, many go months or years between seizures. Many. Not all. He gave me brochures: living with epilepsy, teens and seizures, staying safe. Smiling faces on the covers, kids my age hugging surfboards, playing guitar, doing normal things. Captions promising, "You're still you." But when we got home, and I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the little orange bottle of pills in my hand, I felt anything but myself. I felt like a house that had just discovered its own wiring was faulty. The first night I took the medication, I lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts a little slower, the corners of the room soft and blurry. What if I had another seizure in my sleep? What if I stopped breathing and no one knew? What if I bit through my tongue completely? What if my brain decided, mid-dream, to chase itself in circles again? 16-year-olds are supposed to be afraid of exams, rejection, embarrassment, not their own unconsciousness. I realized with a sort of grim clarity that I was now afraid of letting go. Sleep itself started to feel dangerous. Letting my mind drift, relaxing fully, it all carried new risk. So I lay there, eyes on the ceiling, counting my heartbeats, waiting for the rhythm to falter. It didn't. Of course it didn't. Bodies are stubbornly ordinary most of the time, but the possibility was enough. Just before my 16th birthday, my mother sat on the end of my bed, her hand curling around my ankle in that familiar, unconscious gesture she'd had since I was small. "You're still you," she said softly. "This doesn't change that." I wanted to believe her, but the truth was, I didn't know who me was anymore. Was I the boy who struggled to say his own name on the first try? The quiet kid in the back of the classroom? The one who sometimes woke up on cold tiles, nurses hovering, with no memory of how he got there? Identity, I was starting to understand, is not something you decide in a vacuum. It's shaped by what your body will and won't do, what the world sees when it looks at you, what labels attach themselves and refuse to come off. Epileptic. The word slipped into the same internal folder where speech impaired already lived. Another line in my invisible biography. Another reason to treat me carefully, or differently, or not at all. Back at school, news traveled the way it always does among teenagers. Fast, incomplete, dramatic. He had a fit in the library. I heard he swallowed his tongue. I think he nearly died. None of that was quite true, but it didn't matter. The story had already taken shape without me. Once again, other people were doing the talking. Teachers started looking at me like I was made of glass. One pulled me aside after class. "If you ever feel strange," she said, searching for the right word, "you let me know, okay? Step outside. Don't be embarrassed." The thing was, I was embarrassed. Not because of the seizure itself. I hadn't been there for it, not really, but because of what it meant. Another visible failure of my body, this time in a way no one could ignore. Speech was an awkwardness people could pretend not to see if they were kind, or weaponize if they weren't. Epilepsy was harder to dismiss. A seizure demanded attention. It dragged witnesses in, rewrote their day, imposed itself. My greatest fear, I realized, was not just losing control. It was losing control in front of other people. The neurologist had told me the signs to watch for. "Do you ever get a funny feeling before?" he asked during a follow-up. I nodded. "Describe it." I struggled to find words, as usual. "It's like..." I paused, searching. "Like the room gets far away, and my chest feels tight, like a storm coming." He wrote something down. "An aura," he said again. "A warning. But a warning is only useful if you can do something with it." What was I supposed to do? Announce to the class, "Sorry, might fall on the floor and shake in about 30 seconds, don't mind me." Put my hand up in the middle of a lesson and say, "Could I please have a safe space to lose consciousness?" Instead, every little twinge became suspect. A moment of dizziness when I stood too quickly. A flash of light at the edge of my vision. A sudden, unprovoked wave of déjà vu. Each one felt like the first drop of rain. I started scanning rooms automatically. Where would I fall if it happened here? What would I hit? Who would see? Would someone, anyone, know what to do? Instead, every little twinge became suspect. A moment of dizziness when I stood too quickly. A flash of light at the edge of my vision. A sudden, unprovoked wave of déjà vu. Each one felt like the first drop of rain. I started scanning rooms automatically. Where would I fall if it happened here? What would I hit? Who would see? Would someone, anyone, know what to do? On the bus, I chose seats near the aisle so I wouldn't smash my head against the window. In class, I sat away from sharp corners, away from the edges of tables. In the shower, I lowered the water temperature, afraid of slipping, of scalding, of waking up underwater. Seizures turned the world into a map of potential injury. They also turned my own body into suspect territory. I became hyper-aware of every beat of my heart, every flicker in my vision, every tremor in my hands. Was this normal? Was this medication? Was this the beginning of the next one? It was a different kind of stutter, not in sound, but in trust. My relationship with my body had never been simple. My mouth had always been this unreliable gate between inside and outside. I had learned, painfully, that wanting to say something and being allowed to say it were not the same. Now my brain, the command center itself, had revealed its own capacity to misfire. It could hijack my muscles, twist my limbs, shut out my consciousness, all without my consent. Control, I realized, had always been a fantasy, ability dressed up as choice. In speech therapy, I'd been told, over and over, that with enough practice, enough patience, enough strategies, I could learn to control my words. Slower, they said. Breathe. Start again. You're in charge of your voice. Epilepsy laughed at that. You're in charge of nothing, it said. The second seizure came 3 months later. I was in the kitchen, pouring cereal, late afternoon. My mother at the sink, washing dishes. The TV murmured from the lounge room. It was all so normal it hurt. Then that now familiar slip in reality, that far-away feeling. The edges of the room losing their sharpness. The air thickening. "Mum," I tried to say, but the word came out wrong, blurred, slow. She turned, dishcloth in hand, just as my body started to fold. I caught a single fragment of her face, eyes widening, mouth opening, before I was gone again. No library this time, no tile, just void. When I woke, I was on my side on the kitchen floor, a towel under my head, my mother kneeling beside me, tears streaking her face. My father was on the phone with emergency services, voice tight but controlled. "He's come around now," he was saying. "Yes, second time in 3 months." My tongue hurt again, my muscles screamed, my skull throbbed. I started to cry without meaning to, not from pain, from humiliation, from the raw awareness that I had left the scene of my own life again without warning and without consent. My mother stroked my hair. "It's okay," she whispered over and over. "You're okay. You're here." But that was exactly the problem. I hadn't been here. I had been erased for a few minutes, replaced by something else that shook and twitched and terrified people I loved. And I would never know exactly what that looked like. I only got the aftermath, the ache, the looks, the hushed phone calls. "You were so still afterwards," my mother said once, as if a memory haunted her more than the convulsing, like you were gone. Gone. The word lodged in my chest like a splinter. With speech, my struggle had always been about not disappearing, getting people to wait long enough to hear me, fighting to exist in conversations that moved faster than my mouth. Epilepsy forced a different kind of vanishing act on me. It took me away completely, then dropped me back into the scene, confused and exhausted, in the middle of other people's fear. I started to notice how much of identity relies on continuity. We believe we are the same person from one moment to the next because we remember the chain of events that connects them. We tell ourselves a story about who we are, and every second we're conscious, we're adding to it. A seizure snapped that chain. It created a blackout in the narrative, a hole I couldn't fill with memory. Other people had to fill it for me. "You stiffened up," my father said. "Then you fell. Your arms were jerking. Your eyes rolled back." He said it clinically, trying to spare me, but I could hear the strain in his voice, hear the helplessness. I imagined myself from the outside, my body no longer mine, acting out a script my conscious mind never received. I tried to stitch that into my sense of self, and found it didn't fit cleanly anywhere. Who was I in those minutes? Did that count as me? Or was I only myself when I was in control? And if that was true, how much of my life already belonged to that category? Between the stuttered sentences and the blank seizures, the answer was unsettling. Control had always been rationed out to me, in smaller portions than other people seemed to get. Now, at the age when everyone around me was acting like they owned their future, learning to drive, sneaking beers, kissing each other clumsily at parties, I was learning how fragile my claim on my own body really was. The neurologist adjusted my meds after the second seizure. "We'll increase the dose," he said. "It can take time to find the right balance." Balance. Another neat word for a messy reality. Another neat word for a messy reality. The higher dose slowed me down. My thoughts felt like they were moving through syrup. I'd search for a word, not just to say, but to think, and find it half a second later than I used to. At school, teachers noticed. "You're quieter than usual," one said, not unkindly. I almost laughed. I had always been quiet, but now there was a difference, a kind of internal hush, like someone had turned the dimmer switch down on my mind. I'd come home after a full day of classes and need to sleep, deep, heavy naps that swallowed whole hours. My mother would let me, hovering, anxiety coiled tight in her shoulders. Side effects are normal, the doctor had reassured us. Normal, another word stretched too thin. The medication was supposed to keep the storms at bay. That was the deal. Trade a little speed, a little lightness, for stability. But stability had a cost. My already cautious speech became even slower. Pauses lengthened, thoughts lined up reluctantly, dragging their feet. The gap between the fluent monologue in my head and the fractured sentences on my tongue seemed wider than ever. It was cruel, the way the two conditions mirrored and fed each other. Epilepsy took my trust in my brain's continuity. The medication dulled my edges. Speech impairment continued to trip up every attempt at spontaneous expression. My body had become a patchwork of limits. When you grow up with one visible disability, you learn, reluctantly, how to carry it. You figure out how to make jokes first, how to explain it in simple terms so other people aren't uncomfortable, how to nod along when they say, "I don't even notice anymore," even though you know they do. Adding another condition felt like stacking weights on a bridge that was already creaking. 16 is when you're supposed to decide what kind of person you are going to be. Confident, funny, serious, wild, safe. You try on identities like jackets, seeing what fits. I tried to imagine myself as the epileptic one in my group, the boy who might drop without warning, the guy no one wanted at pool parties in case he seized in the deep end, the passenger who made everyone nervous on road trips. I wanted to be known for something else, anything else. But bodies have their own priorities. They write the headlines, whether you agree with them or not. In the months after the diagnosis, I developed small rituals to trick myself into feeling safer. Before going into a crowded place, a shopping center, the train station, an assembly, I'd scan for exits, railings, soft places to land. I'd make sure my phone was charged, emergency contacts easy to reach. I always had a little card in my wallet that read, "I have epilepsy. If I have a seizure, please," followed by instructions. It was like carrying a note from my conscious self to whoever might meet the unconscious version. Please, be kind to him. Don't be afraid. Don't put anything in his mouth. Wait, he comes back. I thought often of how much of my life had involved asking people to wait. Wait for my sentence. Wait for my word. Now, wait for me to return to my own body. Losing control over speech had taught me early that the world is impatient, that if you don't keep up, it moves on without you. Losing control over my whole body drove that lesson deeper. Friends invited me to gatherings, and then, after the second or third time I declined, they stopped asking as often. Not out of malice, just momentum. Teenagers move fast. They want ease. They want unburdened fun. I understood. I didn't blame them. I was heavy to carry. Meds, rules, early nights, no flickering lights, no all-nighters. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. There's a particular loneliness in knowing that, at any moment, your body might hijack someone else's day, that being around you carries a small, invisible risk. I began to remove myself preemptively, to avoid sleepovers, to say no to long drives, to stay home, studying, when what I was really doing was staying near my parents, near people who knew what my body could do and what to do when it did it. It's a strange thing, building a life around the possibility of absence. You plan your days not just around what you'll be doing, but around where you'll be if you suddenly vanish. You choose friends, not just based on who makes you laugh, but on who might hold your head away from the pavement if the storm hits. You learn to read your own flickers, your own glitches, and to make endless tiny negotiations with yourself. I'm a bit tired, but maybe I can still go. The lights in that place are weird. Better not. One beer is okay with the meds, right? Better ask the doctor. Again. Everything becomes conditional. If my brain behaves, if my body cooperates, if the medication works this month. Yet, in the middle of all that, something else took shape. Not as silver lining, I don't believe in those. Just a shift. Epilepsy, like speech impairment, stripped me of the illusion that my value was tied to performance, to fluency, to physical reliability. It forced me to confront a brutal question. Who am I when I'm not in control? Not just for a second when a word gets stuck. For whole minutes, whole blank spaces. Who am I when I'm lying on a floor I won't remember, surrounded by people I've frightened, my jaw clenched, my eyes gone? What remains of identity when the body and brain go rogue? At 16, I didn't have a poetic answer. I had shaking hands, sore muscles, a plastic pill organizer on my bedside table, a medical bracelet I wore reluctantly, the engraved word pressed cold into my skin. But the questions dug in anyway. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between storms, another realization settled. I had lived my whole life up to that point under the belief that if I just worked hard enough, practiced enough syllables, breathed through enough blocks, I could earn my right to be heard, to belong. Epilepsy tore that contract up in front of me. There would be no earning this, no fixing it with effort, no bootstrapping my way out. Control, it turned out, was never a prize you won for good behavior. It was a rhythm, sometimes steady, sometimes broken, sometimes snatched from you without warning. The body, like the voice, had its own tempo, its own storms. I had spent years trying to get my speech to keep up with the pace of the world. Now I was learning, painfully, that there were times when all I could do was surrender. Lie down, let the electricity run its course. After every seizure, there was a strange, fragile period. The world felt thin. Sounds were too loud, light too bright. My body hummed with a tiredness that felt cellular, like it had borrowed energy from tomorrow just to get me upright. In those hours, everything slowed. I moved carefully, spoke less. My parents hovered. The house seemed to hold its breath. In that post-storm quiet, I found a kind of raw honesty. No pretending, no performance, no trying to sound better than I felt. I was just a boy whose brain had slammed him against the edge of himself and then handed him back, shaken. And yet, underneath the fear, underneath the anger, underneath the grief of another loss of control, something stubborn remained. The same thing that had kept me trying to say my name over and over in classrooms full of impatient eyes. The same thing that had whispered, "Wait," in the speech room when no one ever did. A refusal to vanish completely. I couldn't stop the seizures. I couldn't untangle my words on command. But I could refuse, quietly and persistently, to let these things be the whole story. Even as my body stuttered and misfired, even as my brain short-circuited and reset, there was still that clear, insistent presence inside, watching, remembering what it could, filling in the blanks with its own narrative when memory went dark. The internal voice that had never once stuttered, the one that would, in time, become the only voice I had left. Back then, at 16, I didn't know that. All I knew was this. My life now had a new rhythm, not the smooth, predictable beat other kids seemed to dance to, but a jagged, syncopated one, long stretches of normalcy, punctuated by sudden, violent silence. I was living inside a storm system I couldn't see, and, like with my speech, I would have to learn, somehow, to exist in the pauses.